Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Nilanjan Sarkar, and I'm Deputy Director, the South Asia Centre here at the London School of Economics. A very warm welcome to all of you to this afternoon's event, which is in fact the last event in this academic term for us. And the event this afternoon is on the Rohingyas. And it's titled, Have We Forgotten Them? And the focus of it, I hope, is going to be why it is that in academic circles, outside of those who are particularly interested in the subject, as well as in the wider conversational networks, the conversations about the Rohingyas seem to have disappeared or definitely lessened to a marked degree. It always happens. There's a hectic pace of global events. A lot has been happening in South Asia over the last year and a half, upending, as it often happens, serious humanitarian issues, which should hold our concern forever and all the time until such time that it gets solved to some degree. Of the dramatic events that have happened in South Asia over the last couple of years, there's been a change in the political guard in Bangladesh, a very, very dramatic change. There have been tensions between India and Pakistan. There has been, for the first time, a left of center government in Sri Lanka, and so on and so forth. There have been tensions between Maldives and India. So there have been a lot of things. And amidst all this, somewhere, somehow, conversations about the Rohingyas seem to have lessened. It's as much because of global events as well. But for us in South Asia, this is very, very important. And therefore, there was also, I should mention, there was the earthquake in Myanmar, which was very, very dramatic and had devastating effect. So where in all this are the Rohingyas, and what is happening right now? What are the ground realities, and where are we with it, generally speaking? I'm delighted to say that we have an eminent panel of specialists who will speak on it this afternoon. But before that, may I say a very warm welcome to all of you who have joined us from various parts of the world. I know you have joined from different parts simply because of the emails that you sent to get the live stream link. Thank you very much for making the time to join us in this event. The event is happening via Zoom and is being live streamed on YouTube. And as you would have noticed by now, the chat function in YouTube is enabled. Please ask your questions via that chat function. Please type your questions over there. And I will pose those questions on your behalf to the speakers at irregular intervals once they have made their initial remarks. If you are the kind who tweets, then please do tweet and please do tag us. You will see in the description of the event on your screen just below the YouTube channel the Twitter handles of all the speakers who are speaking this afternoon. I should also add over here that had this event been happening on site at LSE, members of the audience at public events at LSE have the right to pose questions at events to panelists without revealing their name or their identity. So in keeping with at least the spirit of that, when I read out questions typed by you, I will not be reading your names. I'll simply read the question out. You are welcome to ask questions to an individual speaker. You are equally welcome to pose a question to the entire panel, and then we can take turns at who answers them. It is now my very pleasant duty to introduce the panelists. Just before we came live, we had a brief chat about the order in which the panelists will speak, and that is the order in which I will introduce them. I should add over here that one of our speakers, Shafiur Rahman, will need to leave after about 45 minutes. So if there are questions that you want Shafiur to answer, please do write them soon enough so that we can pose the questions to him before he leaves. Our first speaker this afternoon is Tun Khin, who is a Rohingya activist and human rights advocate and president of the Burmese Rohingya Association here in the United Kingdom. Shafiur Rahman is a London-based journalist and documentary filmmaker who has worked extensively on the Rohingyas and writes the Rohingya Refugees.news newsletter. I'm going to say that again. It's Rohingya Refugees.news newsletter. Mabrur Ahmed is founder, director, and CEO of Restless Beings and works on the ground in the Rohingya refugee camp in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, along with doing several other things Restless Beings does do. Please do have a look at the website. I'm just speaking about Cox's Bazar here because it is relevant to the event this afternoon. Our final panelist is Dr. Ronan Lee, who is Leverhulme Trust Early Career Fellow at Loughborough University, London, and is the author of Myanmar's Rohingya Genocide, Identity, History, and Hate Speech, which was published in 2021. Our discussant for this afternoon is Penny Green, who is Professor of Law and Globalization at Queen Mary University of London and founder and director of the International State Crime Initiative, that is ISCI, and recently completed a research project on the Rohingya genocide in Myanmar. Everyone, welcome to this afternoon's event. The way we are going to do this is that we're going to begin with Tun Khin, and everyone will make initial remarks of about 6 to 8 minutes, and then we will start the discussion. So, Tun Khin, please speak now. You have 6 to 8 minutes. Thank you.
Good afternoon. First of all, thank you so much for having me here. This is a very timely event where Rohingya situation is really bad in Rakhine state, also 8 cuts and others happening in the refugee camps. So I will be speaking a few ways. First thing, I will speak about current situation of Rohingya in Rakhine state, update, and I will speak about how justice and accountability is, where we are. Where are we? We have 3 cases, and also I will put some recommendations. What can be done for that? And first thing, Rakhine state situation, firstly, like Rohingya communities across Rakhine state are facing starvation. They desperately need food assistance. If they do not get it very soon, we worry that large numbers of people, especially children, will die. Secondly, Arakan army continues to perpetrate human rights violations against Rohingya communities, especially in Butidong and Maundor, where the largest Rohingya community live. Thirdly, the situation is so desperate that large numbers of Rohingya are taking huge risks to flee. They are extremely vulnerable to human traffickers. So starvation. In November last year, UNDP warned that famine was imminent in Rakhine state, with 2 million people at risk of starvation. Since then, we have seen no let-up in humanitarian access restriction. The regime has maintained the trade and aid blockade in place since November 2023, including its ban on importing medicine to Rakhine state. At the same time, the crippling aid cuts are having a devastating effect. On 14 March this year, I'm talking about last 2 months ago, the World Food Program, WFP, warned that 1 million people in Myanmar would be cut off from life-saving food assistance from April. That includes Rohingya confined to camps in central Rakhine state who have no other access to food. There are more than 120,000 Rohingya in camps in Sitwe. Half of them are children. We are getting reports that many of them receive no food rations at all in March and April. They have had to forage for taro root and sweet potato remains left over from the harvest. People are starving. Families and children are going to camp begging for food. People in Sitwe are extremely vulnerable and truly desperate. We have confirmed reports that women from every camp are engaging in sex work purely for their survival. A family of 4 attempted suicide. Sadly, the father died, but his wife and children survived after their neighbors saved them. This is not an isolated case. There is so much suffering and psychological distress in the camps. And another thing is Arakan army human rights violations and crimes committed in Rakhine state. Rohingya living under control of Arakan army in Butidong and Maundor townships are facing starvation, especially IDPs. In Butidong, some of the Rohingya IDPs who were displaced by the fighting last year report that they are only eating low quality rice once a day. Sometimes they don't have it. The car the curry they can sometimes have is made only with leaves. We are very concerned that children may be showing signs of severe acute malnutrition. According to reports we are getting from the ground, children with severe acute malnutrition need immediate treatment or they will die. In Maundo, ITPs are very difficult situation. At least 10 children died from outbreak of diarrhea at Lapukam transit camp where they were being held by Arkan Army. Arkan Army imposed movement restriction on Rohingya communities which prevent them from fishing and farming. They need a permission letter from Arkan Army to go to the market to buy food. It is very difficult for them as they have no income source. In Butidong, some IDPs have allowed to return to their original villages, but only if they pay a fee to Arkan Army. Rakhine people do not have to pay any such fee. Other Rohingya IDPs have been ordered to relocate to places decided by Arkan Army. They are denied right to return to their original villages. The AA is consolidating and reconfiguring Rohingya villages, cutting people from their homes and livelihoods, from forcing people to rebuild their lives from scratch with no help or support. People don't have anywhere to live as houses in those villages were damaged during the fighting. They struggle to buy materials to rebuild. 118,000 Rohingya have fled to Bangladesh since November 2023, according to government of Bangladesh. The highest number of people arrived in June and July last year. Just this month, more than 400 Rohingya have died at sea after attempting to flee. We have confirmed reports from the ground that Arkan Army is profiteering from human trafficking, both directly and indirectly. In northern and central Rakhine state, human trafficking groups have to pay to Arkan Army to be allowed to operate. People fleeing from Butidong with human traffickers also have to pay AA for departure permit signed by Arkan Army commander, area commander, to allow them to travel through Arkan Army control areas. In Choctaw Township, Arkan Army is heavily involved in human trafficking. One source tells us, even a child will tell you that Arkan Army and human traffickers are one and the same. Every week, human traffickers take young Rohingya men and women. Over 2,000 Rohingyas are deported to have left Choctaw Township in 2025 alone this year. Arkan Army are exploiting vulnerability of Rohingya for financial gain and clearing them out of Rakhine state. And I would like to mention a bit about where is our cases are. Justice and accountability since 2017, Burmese military genocide against Rohingya community. You all know that about 1 million people fled. And one thing unitedly, what we heard from those in the camp, genocide survivors, they told us, we want justice. So we filed a case in Argentina, our organization, and there is a case from Gambia filed, genocide case at the International Court of Justice. There is a deportation case, International Criminal Court. Let me start to say mention about Argentina case, which we filed in 2019, and we were able to submit all the evidence. And one thing from Cox's Bazar, there are 6 women and 1 man traveled to Buenos Aires. They were able to testify in person hearing. They gave testimony the first time in history. Rohingya women sat down and were able to give what's happened to them. Testimonies are very strong, and later on we submitted, our organization, Burmese Rohingya Organization UK, we filed the case. We submitted arrest warrant to release, and then later, early this year, February 13, 2025, the arrest warrant came out with 25 individuals, including Ming Online, top military general So Wing, and also Aung San Suu Kyi, and former president, and other military top generals. So we are, this is the first time arrest warrant released, for many decades. The military violating, military committing crimes, war crimes, genocide, and crimes against humanity, but no any single thing we didn't see from international side. But this is the first arrest warrant, military must end impunity. So we are currently looking at red alert notice from the red alert notice from Interpol. So we're working on that. This case, we are leading for the justice. It's not only for the Rohingya. One thing we can say, we are working for all the people of Burma to get justice. Our common enemy, this is the military who committed genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, Rohingya and other people of Burma. So ICJ case, we're still waiting for, from the Gambia side. Uh, we hope that maybe in a few months, in next year, there will be some verdict can come out, and all the reports being submitted. Rejoinder also submitted from Gambia side, and ICC deportation case. We are waiting that from ICC court arrest warrant. ICC prosecutor already submitted arrest warrant, but it takes too long. I can't believe that we Rohingya are facing genocide for many decades. We have seen Putin arrest warrant was very fast, and we have seen other arrest warrants and other things from judicial things even they gone very fast. But we are a people facing this genocide for many decades. International community, they are not doing enough to get justice for the Rohingya. For one thing, Argentina, we Rohingya lead our own, and that is what we can see. So we need to push on international community a lot. And I want to call on some key points here, recommendation. We need intense pressure on the current situation that Rakhine Army leadership to stop their acts of collective punishment against Rohingya community. They must end their complicity in human trafficking of Rohingya and put a stop to it completely. And liberation of Rakhine state from military rule cannot come at the expense of Rohingya lives. Rakhine Army is continuing the genocide that Burmese military started, but no action has taken against Rakhine Army. Rakhine Army and its leadership should face sanctions. International community failed to prevent genocide, and now the UK and other donors have cut aid to the victims of genocide. UK and other donors must fully fund humanitarian needs in the refugee camps in Bangladesh. And as the pen holder on Myanmar, UN Security Council, UK government should urgently convene a UN Security Council meeting, especially on the regime's continued obstruction of humanitarian assistance, which is in direct breach of UNSC Resolution 2669. Burmese military is deliberately stabbing the Rohingya in the areas of Rakhine State, which is still controls. So I'm stopping here. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions later on.
Thank you, Tun Khin. I'm sure we'll come back to a lot of the things that you have said, and there will be opportunity for you to speak more again. But could I now invite Shafiur Rahman, who's a London-based journalist and documentary filmmaker. He's worked extensively on the Rohingyas and writes the Rohingya Refugees.news newsletter. Shafiur, please speak now. You have 6 to 8 minutes. You need to switch on your microphone.
Thanks very much, and thanks for the reminder. I've spent the past 8 years interviewing and filming Rohingya in the camps of Cox's Bazar and across Southeast Asia. In that time, Myanmar has slid into a full-blown revolutionary war. Thousands killed, millions displaced, towns flattened by airstrikes. And as you have noted, it barely makes the news. Western media is already saturated by Ukraine, Gaza, and domestic immigration issues. The gap between the scale of suffering that we see and the noise we can make about it is now a huge one. So I'd like to nudge the title of this panel a little bit. The question is not, have we forgotten the Rohingya? Because Myanmar as a whole has been forgotten. It should be, how are we failing the Rohingya every single day? When the Rohingya do break into the news cycle, it's almost always through a narrow keyhole. It's about repatriation, a capsized boat in the Andaman Sea, a fire ripping through the camps. Each story is framed as a one-off emergency. What disappears in this narrative is the slow, organized containment that shapes Rohingya life in every country that they reach. Médecins Sans Frontières, MSF, recently published a report. They see a spectrum of containment. At one end are the fenced IDP camps inside Rakhine state. At the other, legal limbo in Malaysia or Saudi Arabia. In between sit the barbed wire camps, mega camps of Bangladesh. Further down the chain, Thai, Malaysian, and Indian patrol boats now intercept Rohingya at sea and tow them back into danger. That's proof that containment doesn't stop at Bangladesh's barbed wire. It has become the region's unspoken migration policy. MSF estimates that 99% of Rohingya now live under policies that either lock them up or shut them out. This is not an accident. It flows from decades of manufactured statelessness and from an international habit of outsourcing responsibility. Containment is not a neutral word. We can measure the obvious harm, child malnutrition, maternal deaths, and so on. Harder to measure is the ordinary violence. Children who think barbed wire is a normal thing. Teenagers whose aim is to get on a smuggler's boat to Malaysia. Bangladesh tells the world it is a generous host, repeatedly. Yet the camps have morphed into a political economy that exploits Rohingya labor, commercializes their misery, and cements permanent dependency. Work is banned, yet thousands work in construction, harvest salt in Teknaf, stitch garments in Chittagong for a few taka. They're paid a pittance, and that is the idea. At the same time, refugee-run shops are bulldozed, and that is also the idea. Dependency, not security, is the goal. Hundreds of millions of US dollars flows through Cox's Bazar district each year. We often see happy, clappy tweets from agencies for their donors, but the camps still battle dirty water and chronic diseases. Suffering becomes a spectacle that justifies the next funding round. Even the much-touted relocation to Bhasanchar, $350 million to ferry families to a flood-prone island with no real economy, makes sense only if the objective is to move refugees out of sight and kept dependent and contained. Who actually runs this machine at the level of the refugee camp? This is a big question. But a recent thing I read in the Journal of International Humanitarian Action is very revealing. Behind the signboards and aid logos, power sits with Bangladesh's intelligence agencies, the DGFI and NSI. They decide which Rohingya brokers are trusted, which NGOs get access, which camp in charge signs this or that permission. Favored Mazis and volunteers trade information for small favors. Criminal gangs and armed groups flourish in the gaps. The study's authors are blunt. Unless camp management is desecuritized, camp in charge decisions are made transparent, and Rohingya gain a real seat at the table, the machinery of exploitation will stay unchanged. And what about the agency whose blue flag flutters over the camps? UNHCR was created to protect refugees. Increasingly, it manages their containment. Its biometric drive has catalogued every iris and fingerprint and shares that data with the Bangladesh authorities. That entrenches statelessness by making onward flight harder and riskier. and it also shares data with Myanmar. When the Navy built the barracks on Bhasanchar, UNHCR registered the transfers, effectively rubber stamping isolation as humanitarian. The protector has become the bookkeeper, handing out tokens, policing movement, but rarely defending basic rights, the right to move, work, or learn. And the news yesterday, did you hear UNICEF's announcement yesterday? The threatened collapse of education for 250,000 Rohingya children. That just goes to show that humanitarian infrastructure is built on very dodgy scaffolding, always at the mercy of donor politics and never about Rohingya rights. These children are not being educated because they're seen as future citizens or political actors, but as a way to manage a warehouse population on the cheap. Their education, like their shelter, mobility, and food, is not guaranteed. It's contingent. We should realize that yesterday's announcement signals the exhaustion of a model that treats Rohingya education not as a right, but as a humanitarian token. After nearly a decade, we're still talking about learning centers run by volunteers, not schools with state recognition that give out real certificates or indeed any kind of future. Containment happens and persists because it pays. It supplies cheap labor, rewards favored companies, feeds intelligence to the state, and funnels aid money to local elites. Until that system is exposed and its incentives dismantled, attention alone won't help the Rohingya. For a decade, the world has asked, when will they go home? That's the wrong question. We should ask, how do we stop trapping them where they are? The 30th November conference must be more than a photo opportunity for another round of containment cash. It has to demand real reform, rights, representation, and mobility before a single new dollar is pledged. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shafir. You did say, because I know you're going to leave early, so I'm going to ask you this one question by way of clarification, which is that you did say at some point it's not a question of whether the world has forgotten the Rohingyas. It's a question of the world has forgotten Myanmar. And did you want to elaborate on that a bit, in the sense that, as you very well know, one could say that about various regions of the country that would.
Yeah, sure. I mean, Tun Khin has, in his speech, gave a list of things that's been happening in Rakhine State, what the Arakan army has been doing, what the aid blockade, what the inability to get food through to all these areas, what the impact of that has been, how trafficking has increased and exploded, how people are resorting to very, very difficult options in order to just survive, sex work, and so on. None of this hits the news. We can't read this anywhere. This is, only if you are part of the Rohingya kind of network do you encounter this, because unfortunately the Rohingya are not within the global supply chain that is of interest to the world. And therefore, they're not even in the voter bloc that would be of interest to other parts of the world. And that's why it's easy, very easy, for countries to simply move on when there's another crisis. That's what I meant.
Thank you very much. We publish a blog, and I was reading a blog that has been submitted. I was reading it last night, which is a fascinating analysis using Saussure's, signifier and signified, to show how the word Rohingya has entered the language of common people and has come to denote in various places, something that is distinctly negative in Bangladesh. And it's a fascinating a linguistic analysis of a word and how the word has actually traveled, and how people who have moved within Bangladesh, let's say for work or jobs or something, as very casual, even banter, which is one of the most, dangerous, slippery slopes in any sort of conversation, where the word Rohingya is used to refer to someone who, say, migrated from one place to another for work or something. But so I was struck by a lot of the things you were saying. Thank you very much. Mabrur Ahmed is founder, director, and CEO of Restless Beings. Restless Beings works on the ground, various places, but in this instance, I'm going to mention the Rohingya refugee camp in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh. I should say that Mabrur has just returned from a trip to Bangladesh as well. Mabrur, please speak now. You have about 6 to 8 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Nilanjan. Firstly, I want to just extend my thanks to the hosts, South Asia Centre at LSE, and also it's really wonderful to be amongst a very distinguished panel who I can call friends. I think it's really pertinent what Shafir has just said. And I can't agree more with every sentiment that he's mentioned. And I think it's really important that you mentioned that word, the terminology signifier versus signified, because it's going to touch on some of the things that I would like to speak about as well. I will focus a little bit more on Cox's Bazar and the situation there. But if I can start off by kind of echoing some of the words that Tun Khin already said as well about the situation in Arakan state. We know in Sittwe, malnutrition is at the very forefront of the daily life and struggle of people who have been, cooped up inside a camp. And it can only be really called an internment camp that has existed since at least 2012. We're talking about almost 15 or 16 years. It's a very, very long time for people to live in the continued cycle of disproportionate and absolutely abhorrent conditions. And it's interesting because when we talk about the siege, if you like, on humanitarian assistance, and we talk about the continued attacks on a civilian population, and we talk about the continued method of barbaric containment of these communities inside Arakan, you could really just change the term Arakan to Gaza, because it's essentially one of the same thing. And that level of oppression obviously doesn't make the headlines in the same way that other areas of the world do. I've always found in this line of work for the past 20 years or so that without comparison, you can't inch forward. And with comparison, you also can't inch forward. And it's very difficult to compare people's plights in different parts of the world, but without doing so, it's very difficult to also push the needle on people's understanding and comprehension. Sometimes, and I feel like over the last, since 2017, it's been there's been 2 election cycles in Bangladesh in December 2018 and January 2024 as well. There's been a whole revolution in Bangladesh. There's a constitutional kind of question, I suppose, an existential threat to Bangladesh in that time. And once I've sat on panels like this and similar, oftentimes, as an activist, I suppose, and someone who's on the ground, and I hear my colleagues who are academics as well doing the same sort of thing, when we're asked to speak about this type of, plight, this community, we talk about statistics and we paint pictures and we tell stories. But sometimes, and I feel that time has already come and passed, that to do so translates only statistics. It doesn't translate the actual conversation that we need to be having. We need to shift the narrative somewhat away from suffering and oppression and to who are the perpetrators and who are those that are causing this in the first instance. Sometimes we can come across with our bodies of work, with our bodies of experience, just relaying suffering, and not enough focus is given on, well, how do you stop it and who's to blame for it and who's at the root and cause of this? And I think that narrative, if we're talking about, obviously the grand question here is, how do we bring it back into significance? And again, the signified paradox, if you like, When we talk about the Rohingya, often we're talking about statistics, often we're talking about oppression, often we're talking about forced poverty and forced decision-making. But not often enough are we talking about, well, who made those decisions in the first instance? If I circle back a little bit towards Cox's Bazar now, the US aid cuts in March, as Shafir mentioned, as of yesterday, there were protests all across Cox's Bazar of people who are, if you like, local employees and workers unable to get to their places of work in the various hospitals and schools. And I will use those terms as opposed to learning centers and field medical assistance hubs. I will use the terms of hospitals and schools, because that's how the people see these places. If they're not able to access those things and those services, then ultimately what happens is the entire infrastructure that has supposedly been built on the back of billions of dollars is broken overnight by one donor seemingly pulling the plug. How can that be something which can be maintained for the future? Why is that not the headline? The conversations oftentimes about the Burmese military committing these atrocities, the Bangladesh government oftentimes withholding certain rights and giving certain privileges to people who they don't even refer to as refugees, they refer to them as forcibly displaced Myanmar nationals. I always find that to be such an atrocious kind of use of language that you can't even use the term refugees, even if the legal entity doesn't exist. You can't even use the term Rohingya, even if you don't recognize that identity, but that you choose to use a term such as forcibly displaced Myanmar nationals, which ultimately means nothing. These types of things, when you're looking at the Burmese government, you look at the Bangladesh government, you start to kind of find the root causes of why these people are going through their ongoing suffering. But then also, if you look at the US aid cuts, then the USA must surely also enter that conversation about who's to blame and who are the people who continue this genocide on the Rohingya people, because it's not without knowledge that the cutting of US aid budgets would do this to communities. A few days ago, it was the conclusion of the ASEAN summit, I think in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, and glaringly missing once again is any sort of conversation around the issue of the Rohingya people. So once that the situation that the Rohingya find themselves in Cox's Bazar, at least now in refuge supposedly, but having found some sort of permanence, is again consigned to camp management tactics and decision making. And Shafir mentioned this, and I will echo it, and I will echo it 1,000 times over, because I think it's the most pertinent point that there is to make here. Until and unless the Rohingya find themselves at the decision-making table, decisions made across the US and Europe and other places around the world simply cannot, just by their very nature, they cannot address the day-to-day difficulties, the day-to-day life that needs to be led by the Rohingya. And I'll just end on this one point. I'm trying to be as succinct with my time as possible. Again, about the conversation around how we refer to the Rohingya and kind of almost pushing statistics and pushing suffering at the forefront. Oftentimes we forget a population of 1 million plus in Cox's Bazar continue to get married. They continue to bury their dead. They continue to have births. They continue to have family occasions. And until we humanize that conversation, move away from the statistics approach and start bringing into sharp focus the enablers and the perpetrators, I don't think we can bring this situation and this issue back to the table. And it's got to do with geopolitics, and it has got to do with, unfortunately, where do the Rohingya and the region of Arakan fit within the geopolitical kind of mindset of the world. If they don't, then let's start talking about the perpetrators, because the USA is unfortunately known around the world as a global leader. And if it's a global leader in enabling genocide and the continued perpetration of the Rohingya people, then maybe that's the headline that we go with. Thank you.
Thank you, Mabrur. Dr. Ronan Lee is the Leverhulme Trust Early Career Fellow at Loughborough University in London. and is the author of Myanmar's Rohingya Genocide, Identity, History, and Hate Speech, which was published in 2021. Ronan, please speak now. You have about 6 to 8 minutes.
Thanks very much. Absolutely wonderful to be with you. It's a brilliant panel, and I'm absolutely delighted to be part of it. I don't want to say all the things I agree with all the previous speakers, but I want to particularly thank Mabrur for his comments. Absolutely spot on. It's a geopolitical issue. I think the reality that we face and that the Rohingya have faced for some time is that they're butting up against geopolitics, and that's a genuine challenge for the community. I'm going to talk about geopolitics now for just a couple of minutes, and this is not going to cheer anyone up. So what we see happening, I think, I'll talk about Myanmar in just one second, but I'm going to first talk about what's happening with Bangladesh. I think that there is some perception, and I would think it's pretty important that we're very clear about what's going on with this conference that's proposed. It's nothing to do with a long-term solution. It's nothing to do with rights. It's nothing to do with the welfare of the Rohingya community. This is about cash, pure and simple. And that's you could argue that it's a political reality for the Yunus administration in Bangladesh, but I think what's very clear is that what they're after is an ongoing commitment of money from international donors, and that's occurring within the context of cuts to USAID, a withdrawal of the US, a real retreat of the US from the region and from funding of bodies like the UN. The US at least used to pretend that it cared about the Rohingya community. They didn't match their rhetoric with action, but there was always some embarrassment on their part that required them to put some money in. That pretense, I think, has gone under Trump, and I think that the Yunus administration is concerned about where the money is going to come from. But when we accept, or if we accept, that this is a conference, that's an international conference that's about getting money and about guaranteeing funds, then we're accepting that this is a conference that's about funds for the incarceration of Rohingya civilians and the long-term incarceration of Rohingya civilians. Because what we're not hearing is talk about a solution. We're not hearing talk about the inclusion of the Rohingya within that. And that's broadly reflected in the politics of the region. So when we look at what's happening with the attitudes of China, of India, and of ASEAN, they as regional powers, they're okay. So we would say that China's relations with the Myanmar junta are stronger than those of ASEAN or India, but in reality, in practice, there's very little difference on the ground. And in that, I see China, India, and ASEAN are more than happy now to normalize relations with the junta, and that they're moving in that direction. And that should be deeply troubling for anyone that wants to remove those genocidal maniacs from power within Myanmar. So that should be an issue that is of great concern to the NUG and, of course, to the Rohingya community. Worryingly within that, there seems to be a growing acceptance by countries like Malaysia and Indonesia that they're comfortable with. Their rhetoric has certainly changed on Myanmar. They're certainly not as strident as they were in the days in the early days after the coup, and they're certainly not as supportive of the Rohingya as they were in years gone by. So that really leaves ASEAN as a body that I think will slowly but surely accept the junta as a legitimate government of Myanmar, which is what China would like to see. And that's a position that we're seeing India increasingly leaning into. So their there's the regional context, which should be deeply worrying for the Rohingya and for those who work with them and care about them. That you've got the US retreating, you've got money been pulled out, you've got Bangladesh looking to plug that gap with funds that purely incarcerate the Rohingya long term. You've got the regional powers normalizing relations with the Myanmar junta. And what that means is that any long-term strategies about return and repatriation become deeply problematic. So that's the complication. That's what we're seeing. I want to further complicate things by talking just very quickly about the National Unity Government. I think there's some real issues in terms of where the National Unity Government the Myanmar National Unity Government stands on their attitude towards the Rohingya community and its legitimacy within Myanmar. And I think the NUG's reluctance to call out the appalling actions of the Arakan army really highlight that. And that's something that we need to be mindful of, because if the alternative to the Myanmar military junta is a national unity government that is more or less happy to pursue similar but perhaps less violent strategies towards the Rohingya, or at least tolerate those, then I think long term there's a serious problem with how we perceive what might be a positive future within Myanmar. Although as things stand, the NUG's relative position is not as strong as it was, I think, 12 months ago. And the junta is appearing to be surprisingly resilient. I should caveat this by saying that this could change, and it could change very quickly if there's a strong push from the People's Defence Forces at the end of the rainy season. So this could change in the latter part of this year, but I think what we're seeing at the moment, is a move towards normalizing relations with the junta, and I think there's genuine pressure now on the NUG and on the People's Defence Forces to actually get these guys out of power, or at least indicate that they're going to be able to get them out of power, and that's got to happen very, very quickly. If we were talking a year ago or 2 years ago, we would say they had some time, but I think patience now is running out a little bit, and that's in a context where you've got major powers within the UN, certainly on the Security Council, that are more than happy to have the junta in power. So what does this mean? What it means, I think, is that we need to be mindful about what this conference is about. This conference is about money. And that's certainly what the organisers want the conference to be about. And I don't think we should accept that. I think that it's important that the conference is not just about funding the long-term incarceration of Rohingya civilians, but that the conference is an opportunity, and should be an opportunity, to talk about long-term solutions. So two things that I think need to be done urgently. One, obviously, we want to see support for the refugees, but in terms of the finances, we want the schools reopened, but we also don't want a situation where there is no plan for a long-term future, and that the long-term future that's presented to them is an open-air prison. And I'll leave it there. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Ronan. I think Shafir has left. He needed to leave early, but he wanted me to read out a comment, Ronan, which is in response to what you are saying. And that is, in essence, about education and the opening of schools. And I'm just going to read out what he's written. It's a bit long-winded, but I don't want to paraphrase what he's saying. Education can be financed through multi-year development instruments like World Bank, IDA, Global Partnership for Education, rather than annual humanitarian appeals. UNICEF can broker that shift. It has done so in Jordan and Lebanon. If Bangladeshi schools near the camps opened their doors to Rohingya children, a share of national and World Bank education budgets would follow automatically. Segregated learning centers keep Rohingya schooling in the charity box forever. This is what has resulted in the enmity and why the sacked teachers are comparing Rohingyas to Israelis. That's a message from Shafir. We can take that up later because I want to bring Penny in now. Penny Green is Professor of Law and Globalization at the Queen Mary University of London, is founder and director of the International State Crime Initiative. And Penny recently completed a research project on the Rohingya genocide in Myanmar. Penny has kindly agreed to be the discussant this afternoon. Penny, please speak now.
Oh, thank you very much for an absolutely fascinating set of contributions. I mean, not only factually really important and bringing people to some extent as up to date as possible in fairly brief presentations, which I think you all did absolutely perfectly, but also raising these much broader questions about the future. And I think I've just returned from the Gaza People's Tribunal in Sarajevo, and Gaza is very much on my mind as we listen to presentations about the Rohingya, as we think about the Rohingya. So I had a number of questions, and I wanted to start with Tun Khin and ask about any alliances that the Rohingya have developed with Palestinians and with Palestinian solidarity, the Palestinian solidarity movement, because I think the appalling, grotesque barbarity that we're witnessing in Gaza and the resistance to Israel and to the Zionist state presents certain opportunities, I think, for the Rohingya to elevate the nature of their own struggle. And so, Tun Khin, I wanted to ask you first, before we develop that a little further, have you been reaching out to the Palestine Solidarity Movement, for example, to Palestinians inside both Gaza, the West Bank, or East Jerusalem, occupied East Jerusalem?
Our community solidarities with them, we tweeted about what's happened as a Rohingya. We are facing genocide, but we couldn't reach out directly to them.
Okay, I mean, I can imagine that it must be very dispiriting for Rohingya activists and the Rohingya population to obviously witness the appalling nature of the savagery that's being inflicted on the Gazans at the moment. It's so extreme as to be unimaginable, and it must re-invoke the horrendous experiences of the Rohingya, particularly from 2016 and 17. But I think, so my question might go to the others as well. Does this not create an opportunity for, one of the things about the Rohingya genocide is that it has very little global traction, that there hasn't been the same kind of movement for all sorts of geopolitical reasons. They're very obvious reasons. Both struggles have been going on a very long time. The Myanmar state is a very good friend of the Israeli state. There are lots and lots of really important, if you like, starting points at which the struggles could be combined. And I think that the Rohingya might gain from, I mean, the Myanmar state and the Israeli Zionist regime created an education memorandum, an agreement that they would both review each other's textbooks, historical textbooks, to such a degree that if the Myanmar textbooks are discussing the situation of the Palestinians in a way that is unacceptable to the Israeli state, that they will censor it, and vice versa. So there is a long history of weapons exchange and so on. So we know all that. So what do you think? I mean, do you think that this is a possibility? Do you think that we could use, not in an exploitative way, of course, because we're all fighting against the kind of state crimes that we're witnessing around the world, and we want as sort of much solidarity as possible. So do any of you see an opportunity being presented in this horrendous moment?
I suppose this is for both Mabrur and you, Ronan, unless, of course, Tun Khin, you also want to come in. But shall we do, Mabrur, do you want to go first and answer briefly, and then Ronan?
Yeah, happy to. I think it's very interesting that you mentioned this, Penny, because I think one of the things that I said in my remarks was it's very difficult to compare, and it's very difficult not to compare, right? In almost an equal measure. But let's look at the barbarity. You know, we talk about the barbarism that we've all witnessed, and Israel uses technology, almost technological warfare almost. It drops bombs on schools and hospitals, and it carries out aerial attacks, and Burma burnt children alive, right? So the barbarity is essentially the same. The technology is perhaps somewhat different. And it's interesting if we talk about technology again, because in the case of Gaza, we're all live streaming and watching this. When it comes to the case of the Rohingya, with network blockades and a much more kind of dark ages almost regime that the junta is, hardly anyone, apart from, if you like, the circuit of Rohingya activists and community and academics, saw the majority of it. I mean, we saw the fallout. We saw the BBC and Channel 4 covering thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people walking through muddy paddy fields, but we didn't see the crime itself. Whereas with Gaza, we see the crime. And I think that's possibly one of the reasons why the public outpouring is somewhat different. But, you know, I speak somewhere in between the activist and the academic and the advocate, right? It's a very strange place, sometimes a lonely place, but it's a strange place because public outpouring doesn't necessarily or even eventually lead to policy change or even discourse, right? So you can have hundreds of thousands of people signing a petition, and yes, the rule is 100,000 signatures on a UK change petition will end up in the Commons being discussed. But we know that those discussions normally have about 7 people in there, of which 5 are probably security guards, right? So it doesn't necessarily equate. And I think that's one of the things which the entire church, if you like, the very broad church of people who will always try to support others who are going through oppression, find very, very disheartening and very, very demotivating. And I think we come back to the news cycle, right? Because the news cycle is what pushes and perpetuates and kind of resurfaces emotions and people's feelings. But it's the geopolitics, and you know, the geopolitics is everything, because that's what drives the policy, and through that policy is how public perception once again changes. I think there's absolutely a place where the solidarity movement for Palestine and that for the Rohingya can converge, and you know, as an organization which does both almost, we are more than happy to try and stitch up that communication on behalf of Tun Khin and Bro UK and our good friends at Stop the War and the Palestine Solidarity Organization as well.
Thank you. Ronan, do you want to go briefly?
Yeah, I mean, if you can imagine this, there's deep sympathy within the camps for the situation faced by the Palestinians, and I'm seeing daily. I'm seeing WhatsApps with signs and even sort of shirts, flags indicating solidarity. I think, I think, Penny, the you know, looking beyond the sort of the similarities, looking beyond the historical links, I think what would be really useful, and I just putting a sort of a Rohingya advocacy hat on, purely that, would be, I think what the Rohingya community are going to need now and are going to need in the coming years is new ideas and new strategies. I mean, I think that is something that is becoming really apparent, that the strategies that have been in place and the advocacy that's been in place over the last sort of 20, 30 years gets you so far. It's certainly put the Rohingya on the map in a way that they weren't on the map 15 years ago. And that's I can't imagine how difficult that was to achieve in a crowded media market internationally. But the next step, I think the way that you achieve the next step is that you talk to other groups that have experienced or are experiencing similar challenges, and that's something that I think will benefit the Rohingya community and may well benefit the Palestinian community too. I think there's value as well for ordinary members of these communities having a sense that there is a global solidarity. I mean, I can't imagine what it must be like for a young Rohingya in those camps in Bangladesh, going through the emotional experience of feeling sympathy for a dreadful circumstance happening to someone who they know they will never meet, considering the circumstance the Rohingya community are in. I mean, that is, it's in some way a very human thing, and it demonstrates that despite the genocide, there's a humanity that hasn't been ended for the Rohingya community. But I think, ideas are what I'd love to see being shared. I think that's pretty important. Just briefly on education that was mentioned, he's absolutely, that comment was absolutely spot on. It's never been about money. It's always been about stopping the Rohingya having access to education. That's always, it's never been about the money. It's never been about having willing people to teach. There's always been teachers, but what they've been facing is regulations that have stopped them from actually teaching children in formalized school systems. So it's never been, it's not about the money. We can, donors can dress this up and say it's about the money, but it took years and years and years for Bangladesh and Myanmar to agree as to what curriculum was acceptable in the camps. And during that period where they couldn't agree, because Myanmar wouldn't allow the Myanmar curriculum to be taught, Bangladesh's response was to say, well, I guess we can't let anyone get an education. And that tells me it's definitely not about the money. So I think we should be mindful about that. It's definitely not about the money. And the reason that you would imagine you don't want this community getting educated is you don't want to see a generation of activists being created. You don't want people with the ability to analyze their situation and act on it. And I think that feeds into, that's part of the Bangladeshi government's reluctance to allow a political system within the camps. I mean, why would you disengage people from democratic politics? But that's something that's been done, and I think that's wrong as well.
Thank you. Mabrur, I know you've raised your hand, but I'm going to let Tun Khin speak first. Tun Khin, did you want to come in and say something about what Penny just said?
Yeah, I think that is very important. Sometimes what happens is what Rohingyas are facing is crisis over crisis, one after another. Like 2017, we have 1 million people fled. We are struggling to get justice, but it takes too long, and we can't see that much support, even, to be honest. And another way, aid cutting of another issue, Arkan army getting rid of Rohingya, and they burning down our houses and people are fleeing. So we are having like one after another on the crisis. So Rohingya have not very much resources, and those things are also because of education issues and others, because of so long genocide, genocide been going on against our community. These are the things. We are not very wider activist group we have. So these are some of the issues we are having on that difficulties.
Did you want to say anything about what Ronan just said, that alongside this, there is also the question of a very important need for new ideas and new strategies? Did you want to say anything in response to that?
New ideas about education issues, right? You mean?
No, new ideas and strategies. Ronan, do you just want to explain in one sentence what you meant, and then perhaps Tun Khin can reply?
Oh, yeah. Penny was talking about opportunities to link between what we're seeing happening in Gaza and the Rohingyas experience. And I think one of the things that would be genuinely valuable would be the sharing of ideas and the sharing of strategies and the sharing of analysis. Yeah.
I think that's very, very good, and we are really looking forward to it if someone can help facilitate about it.
Mabrur, briefly, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I'll try and keep it as brief as I possibly can. I think almost all the time when we have conversations like this, there'll be someone in the audience at some point saying, there seems to be a disunity amongst the Rohingya. There's so many different groups and there's so many different ideas and thoughts, and no one can really, come behind one leader. And I think if we talk about the Gaza situation, which is how Penny first phrased the question, if you like, the movement within Gaza, I'm talking about the civil society movement within Gaza itself and then the greater world. We have to understand that time and again, Gaza has actually chosen a government, whether it's legitimate in the eyes of the international community or not, that's beside the point. But it has had the PLO before, it has had the Fatah before, it has Hamas now as well, right? There's the Palestinian Authority. There's so many versions of somewhat a legitimate political struggle, right? When it comes to the Rohingya, however, we know for generations that agency of political will has been denied. So then when 1 million young-ish population find themselves displaced in Bangladesh, which is also a very interesting country, because although there's been an authoritarian regime there, and Nilanjan, you'll know this very well, despite the fact that it was so authoritarian, Bangladesh is a hotbed of democratic discussion, at least. Everyone is aligned to some political movement. There are always political discussions. Everything from sports to arts to culture has an inkling or a nod towards politics. So when this young Rohingya population find themselves in Bangladesh without education, without access to many rights, having never ever really had a political agency in this situation, now you have multiple voices coming to the fore. And as Tun mentioned, there has been crisis after crisis after crisis, whether it was the genocide, whether it was the elephants marauding around in the camps, whether it was fires burning, well, as it is right now, the entire camps being submerged in monsoon rains. There's always one thing that's happening after the other. And so I think what happens in these situations is you've got, like I said, a young Rohingya population wanting agency, not being able to get agency, forming organizations and then having spats, getting somewhat of a seat at the table, but then that seat being taken away, crisis after crisis after crisis physically, and landscape from a landscape perspective. So what you have is this disorganized chaos. And the only antidote to such a disorganized chaos is organized intelligence, organized resistance, organized political movements, organized advocacy. And I think when Ronan talks about ideas, that's the idea that we need to get to. How do we go from this disorganized chaos to this organized methodology that can hopefully liberate at least thought, if nothing else?
Thank you. Penny.
Well, thank you all. I think that there's clearly a demand for something even broader than the individual struggles against the Rohingya genocide and against the genocide of the Palestinians. So I think we're at a very dangerous moment in history. We are, as Gramsci warned, we are living again in a time of monsters. And I think that the rise of fascism is a sort of an underpinning dimension to the experiences that the Palestinians and the Rohingya are facing, but we are all being confronted by it, and it's something that I think we have to factor in to the kind of new ideas that you're talking about, Ronan. So I think that I'll leave that question there now, and thank you very much for your contributions. I wanted to ask, because you've all at some point mentioned the Arakan Army, and I'd like you to talk a little bit more about the way in which we know what's happening at some level, probably more clearly, about the nature of the Bangladesh camps, the way in which, in some senses, genocidal processes are being reproduced all the time. I mean, we have massive segregation, we have the denial of citizenship, we have people who are being systematically weakened because the calorific content of the aid going in is being reduced as US aid is cut and so on. So, and we have sporadic violence because of the political vacuum, which is left by the denial of political processes afforded to the Rohingya. So that's going on inside Bangladesh. The genocide continues in that way inside, with a slow weakening of the community. But inside Rakhine state, the genocide continues under, if you like, I guess we have the Arakan army who appears now to be spearheading the state's genocidal campaign. And I'd like people to talk a little bit about that. And I'd like Tun Khin also to talk about, because you mentioned the camps that are being run by the Arakan army. And I'd like you to say something about those, because we know the horrendous, squalid nature of the camps inside Myanmar, particularly around Sitwe and Marau. But I'd like you to say something, if you wouldn't mind, about those camps. But I'd like everybody else to also talk about the role that the AA has appeared to assume in terms of doing the state's work, genocidal work.
One thing very clearly here is, shall I go?
Yeah, briefly, please.
But one thing very clearly, Penny, here is, Me Online said in 2017. He gave an interview in Washington Post. He mentioned that this is unfinished business of 1942. So he is implementing that genocide. And I can say that Arakan army is doing unfinished business of Rohingya genocide. Me Online was done. He is starting up. He is finishing it, to be honest, because this genocide is a process, as you have already the report. And as a whole community, Rohingya, we are 3 million. And for now, we are second largest Rohingya community, second largest community in Arakan state. For example, Rakhine are about 3.5 million. Rohingya should be 3 million. So how many Rohingya left in Rakhine state now? Currently about 500,000 or 480,000, roughly, until today. So now these people are fleeing every day by boat or Bangladesh and others. That's what's happening. So our economy strategy is to get Rohingya rid of, and they're doing demographic changes. And what they want is, they want Rohingya have land, northern Arakan, especially Butidong Maungda, Retidong, which is called Mayu Front. They do not want to see the largest Rohingya community area. So they're trying to change the demographic changes there. They're trying to get Rohingya population from there. So that's how they involve in human trafficking. They are getting out Rohingya from Arakan state. So this is very clear, and we have do a lot of reports. And another side, this Arakan army is also getting popular in Burma because they're fighting against Burmese military. So our point is, we talking about inclusive future federal union in Burma. We are not moving another military boots to another military boots, from Myanmar military boots to Myanmar military boots. So we, as a Rohingya, we are a manageable minority, the largest Muslim population in our Burma. We have our forefathers been built up Arakan together with Burma Constitution. We live side by side with the Rakhine community, which is our sister community. Our statement is very clear. We want to rebuild Arakan together with Rakhine, and after getting rid of the military. And military have nothing to do in Rakhine state. But now our economy is trying to wipe out this community. So that's why our point is that is a kind of another way as a whole Burma, even though NUG, I'm glad that Dr. Ronan have mentioned about the NUG silent on our economy atrocities. So as a whole, Rohingyas are unwanted, and it's a human-made tragedy. And is as a whole Burma, we are worrying very, very bleak future. That's what I can see under our economy, though. So one thing for that thing, what we can see is international community. I don't know, people may not like it. We need protected area. We have our land. We want protected area where Rohingyas are living. Otherwise, our roots going to be get rid of by our economy now. What we've seen every day. Can you imagine in 1 year, 118,000 Rohingya fled since our economy fighting with Burmese military? And they under the pretext how Burmese military did, under the pretext of ARSA, they doing the same thing there now in Rakhine state. So that's why we must do sanctions, and international community is still silent on that. That is very worrying. So they enjoy impunity, whatever they do against the Rohingya.
Okay, I'm going to come to Ronan and to Mabrur for you to respond to what Penny just asked. But before that, I have to say to all of you, we have a raft of comments that are coming in as you are speaking, and I can't possibly read out all of them, also because some of them are comments and not questions. But it's very interesting to read them. I'm reading all of them. That's the whole point, to get the audience engaged. But Tun Khin, in response to what you have just said, I'll tell you that there is one comment that says that things are I'm going to read this out verbatim. Things are very different in the Bangladesh camps, North Arakan, Central Arakan, and South Arakan. Rohingya in Central Arakan tell me, that this is the person who's writing this comment, they don't have trouble with the Arakan army. Life for them is better. And there are 6,000 Rohingyas left in Arakan. That's one comment. From several comments, I'm just reading out one comment to you. Okay. The other was a comment earlier, which said that, do you think that the UN could have a role to play in this, in the form of, say, an intervening force or a peacekeeping force, or peacekeeping force is my word. Intervening force or intervention force was what was used, yeah. Do you want to very briefly respond to that, and then we'll let Ronan and Mabrur speak?
Yeah, one thing is what whoever mentioned Arakan army about Rohingyas are more better position or something like that. I don't know how far he is getting information. I'm a Rohingya. I have good contact from the ground, and we are also releasing a report after every 6 months, ICJ provisional measures violations report, upcoming report coming up in next week. So we have good contacts, and he might be a kind of who is supporting our economy, giving these comments. So that is not at all true, totally upside down. He just tried to divert the attention. So I think he's just trying to lobby here for Arakan army in our conversation. Sorry for that. Nobody will believe it. And people have already, many reports are out there. You can look at UN High Commissioner, UN Special, UN Human Rights Commissioner have mentioned in Geneva what they have done. They have slaughtered, they have burned down in one night. Rohingya, 200,000 displaced by Arakan army. So I'm happy to challenge and debate anyone.
Do you think the UN? Do you think the UN has a role?
UN has a role, of course, but unfortunately, so far since 2017, UN security sat down for 6th time in UN security. They have nothing action yet. We haven't seen anything. So it's a deadlock. UN become a dead body. What happens to Palestinian in Gaza? You can see that. So we need like-minded country who come forward for the Rohingya to protect these things we needed. I don't think UN can do anything. Of course, I respect on UN, but UN only relying on the government because there is Security Council, geopolitics is there, as Ronan has mentioned. So China's interest, India interest, and US interest. So a lot of interest, a lot of government they have interest, and they are. You can see what's happened to the what's happened in Burma. Until very bad situation going on, still China is backing up for the election. Just that is the thing. For the Rohingya, so long we are facing that, but still, I can see that that will not be sorted out until some like-minded who really want to solve Rohingya issue need to come forward. That's what I can see.
Okay, thanks. We're going to get Ronan. Do you want to?
Yeah, just very quickly. Penny, to answer your question, the Arakan army have identical views with that of the Myanmar junta, of the Tatmadaw. I mean, their views on the Rohingya are exactly the same, that they are as genocidal as the junta, and given the opportunity, they'll be as problematic for the Rohingya as the Myanmar military were. The problem is that mainstream Rakhine politics has been taken over by a military group. That's the problem now in Rakhine. So when Tun Khin talks about that the Rohingya wants to work with their sister community in the Rakhine, that's important. But the problem is that the Rakhine as a collective aren't in a position to be able to do that because they are being dominated by a military force that claims to represent them, but that is as genocidal and anti-Rohingya as the Tatmadaw, and that's the fundamental problem. And those of us, I mean, I know, Penny, you've done research in northern Rakhine State too, and we've talked to Rakhine. This is not a homogenous community where everyone's a bloodthirsty genocidal maniac. That there were opportunities for civil society, there were opportunities for Rakhine who wanted to work cooperatively with the Rohingya community, but their military leaders, who are the people running the Arakan army, do not want that to happen, and they will not let that happen. And that's why we have a problem in Rakhine State. And the real challenge, there's a challenge for ordinary Rakhine here as well, because what happens in a circumstance where the AA removes the Tatmadaw from Rakhine State? What's the politics of Rakhine? Who's in charge? Well, actually, it's a military dictatorship run by the Arakan army. And how will that? And if you look at their ideology, you can be absolutely certain where they stand. They are. I mean, very much unreconstructed fascists. And you can see in their uniforms even what they advocate, and their logos have been modelled on Second World War German logos. I mean, these are people who are certainly signalling their views, but they are not. They will be a military dictatorship, and I think it will be as problematic for ordinary Rakhine going forward as the Tatmadaw has been for people in the rest of Myanmar, and dreadful for the Rohingya.
Okay, Mabrur, did you?
Yeah, I'll keep my comments very, very brief. Couldn't agree with everything. Couldn't agree more with everything that was said. I think we have seen in the past 18 months examples of when the Rohingya have been used almost as foot soldiers. They've been used as a human shield for both parties, actually. And I think that this, for me, is the more startling and worrisome issue. I think we are probably closer to a junta AA reconciliation power brokerage than we are to an NUG supported by international community government in Burma. I think it's far more likely that the ideologies align along a military dictatorship. And I actually think it's closer than we even think and we even know right now. I think we are on the cusp of that happening.
Penny, we are sort of running slightly against time. Did you want to say anything by way of closing remarks? Did you want to say something, make any comments of your own or ask any other question?
I suppose the only thing that I would say that I draw from all of the presentations, the excellent presentations today, in terms of going forward, is I think that those of us who have worked with the Rohingya, who are Rohingya, who campaign for the liberation of the Rohingya from the yoke of military dictatorship and from the yoke of the Bangladesh camps, is that we have to remind the world and to foreground the perpetrators of this genocide and avoid the inevitable attempt at the humanitarian narrative, which we're already seeing, the suffering of the Rohingya. I think it was Mabrur who mentioned this. We also are seeing it in Gaza at the moment, that the focus has to be on those responsible and why they are responsible. What are the political and economic underpinnings of this genocide, and how do we fight it structurally rather than just deal with trying to ameliorate the lives of those who have been victims of this genocide? So I think that's where I'd like to basically end, though I do see Tun Khin has his hand up, and I think that we should probably let the Rohingya speak last on this panel.
Okay. I just wanted to, Tun Khin, I'm going to give you the chance to speak, of course. I just wanted to say that there are several other comments and questions which we haven't been able to take because we really have 2 or 3 minutes more. But one of them has been that there has been no criticism of the ARSA in the conversation we've had today. Another one, which I'm just going to read out quickly, is how do we balance the need for the justice with the challenges of repatriation, especially when the conditions in the Rakhine state remain unsafe and unchanged? That's another question. But Tun Khin, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, someone mentioned about ARSA criticism. Of course, we have already mentioned they are not representing Rohingya community. You look at 2017, under pretext of ARSA, Burmese military wipe out Rohingya population. So this is the same thing Arakan army is using as a pretext. By using that pretext, they getting rid of Rohingya community. One thing I want to make it clear here is that we've been suffering enough. We face genocide, and our community, we will continue our fight to get our land. We have manageable minority, and we want to work together with everyone in Burma. But we have seen before 2010 election, we campaigned for political prisoner release, including Aung San Suu Kyi and other political prisoners. And we wanted to live peaceful as a principle of peaceful coexistence. We want to live side by side with Rakhine community. But we are not the people. We continuously call dialogue to sit down. We can talk, we can have a dialogue, we can work together. This is something we have done. And the other side, we also, when military coup happened, many people in Burma, they are facing these crimes, what Burmese military have done to the Rohingya. They burning down many parts of the country, Burma side, central Burma, many houses. We have our sympathy to everyone in Burma because we suffered the worst brutality what military have done against our community. But our sympathy, our hearts and minds are with them. But what we have seen, when we suffer, there is no one talking about us. No sympathy from their side we have seen. as a human being, as an oppressed people, a community we face, we together with them, our hearts and minds. But now what can see later on, national unity government showing using the what, only the what, Rohingya, not about our ethnicity, not about our citizenship. And one thing, what we have seen also, national unity government internationally, they showing that they want they recognize the Rohingya, but we call them to about abolish of 1962 82 citizenship law, which one designed by the military dictatorship. They are fighting with against military dictatorship, but they still hold on that law, which deprived even my citizenship was taken away because of that law, even though my grandfather was a parliamentary secretary during democratic period time. That's what I faced. So many Rohingyas like that, but they have not done that. When we got arrest warrant for Argentina, the first time in history for many decades, where other ethnic brothers and sisters were facing, and together with Rohingya, this is arrest warrant first for the military. But NUG come up, national unity government come up with a selective judgment. Selective, they want to see selective justice or something like, I don't know how to call it. They said they want to have only military. When they put Aung San Suu Kyi, they are saying that this is not right. And so how a country facing this situation where we're looking at inclusive federal union for prosperous democratic, inclusive democratic union of Burma, how can you look at if you cannot even talk someone who have defended Rohingya genocide, who was someone at The Hague, everyone knows he defended genocide. And of course, Argentinian judiciary have done, that is not by us. And they targeted me and our organization. Say that's going to be very bad because justice is justice. So we need to learn a lot of things. We need to do a lot of things. So what's happening in Burma, also NUG, Arakan Army, other side. But we Rohingya people, we will work hard to get justice. We will work hard to get our land. We will continue our work to go back to our land where we belong to. I stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you also to members of our audience who've been with us very faithfully and loyally all this while, have been commenting and asking questions. I'm sorry we couldn't take some of your questions. I tried to fit in a few. It does bring to an end this afternoon's very, very interesting and animated discussion, also informative for non-specialists like me. So I do want to thank all of our speakers, panelists. As I say at the end of any event, we do an event almost every week. This one is the last one for this academic year. That if there's anything good that came out of the COVID pandemic, it was that academics became savvy with technology and we learned how to use Zoom. So we are able to convene these sorts of events now where we can bring together so many of you from different parts of the world. But it is equally true that we cannot have these discussions and we cannot have these events unless each of you individually and all of you collectively don't give so generously of your time and your expertise and your ideas. So thank you very much from the LSE South Asia Center to each of you and to all of you, to Tun Khin, to Shafiur Rahman, who had to leave early, Mabrur Ahmed, Ronan Lee, and Penny Green.